Hi, everybody. Welcome to this month's episode of Cronin's Corner. I am State Senator John Cronin, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by one of my colleagues, my friends, and a guy who I really look up to up at the State House, Representative Jim Arciero.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for having me on.
From Westford. So redistricting happened before this last cycle, and now Westford is part of the Worcester and Middlesex district. It's been great working with you.
Yeah,
really
you too.
Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
It's been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for having on your show. I've been a legislator for 15 years now. I'm in my 8th term. I got elected in 2008. And
you have a really easy job right now, right? So you are the chair of the Housing Committee in the State House. When housing's just not getting a lot of attention, right?
No, not enough. No. Certainly, there's a myriad of interests and issues with the whole subject matter. But yeah, we had the largest. The governor had in her State of the State this past week that you and I both attended. She talked about one of her major issues in this housing, right? And that's the whole idea of affordability and access. And I've chaired this committee for the last 4 years, and just to backpedal a little bit before her State of the State and talking about this large housing bond bill that we took up in a public hearing yesterday. But during the pandemic, I think when you were elected, right, it was in the middle of the pandemic. What an interesting time to be running for office. It was difficult. We're trying to protect our families. We're trying to learn about how to protect our community, et cetera, and worked for vaccination sites. I did that with you, and I was named the chair of housing during that period of time. So we were kind of dealing with a crisis within a crisis at the time.
We'll jump into some of the policies and stuff, but it's great for our region that the housing chair is from here, right? I think the housing crisis looks different in different parts of the state, but apart from that and your job right now, I don't think there's a better preparation for the role you have now based on your experience. And I know you worked for State Senator Pangiatakis. You're a veteran of the State House. But can you tell people how you got into the business, you got into public service, running for office, being involved in campaigns, and working in different policy areas?
Well, Senator, thank you. And I think like yourself, there was a sense of service in my family. I'm from a military family.
Yeah.
My father is a Vietnam veteran. My great uncle was in World War II. My brother and brother-in-law did 9 tours. Both Army doctors, both over 50 years of service. I'm an Eagle Scout. I really believe in community. Something that I think, like in an early age, I think in college, I was at UMass. I was a student trustee. I ran in student government. It was something I wasn't interested necessarily in high school, but really found a way that we can work towards bigger things and leave things a little bit better than we found them. And so right out of college and being in student government and working on campaigns and learning about the process and how to help people.
Did you catch the bug right away? What was the first campaign you got involved in? Do you remember?
I do, but I'll tell you where I caught the bug.
Okay.
I caught the bug when I interned in Washington, D.C., and I worked for Congressman Barney Frank. Now, I went to UMass Dartmouth undergrad. And
his district?
That was his district.
Right,
and one of the deans, Dean Howard, who's passed, he was a wonderful man, gave me that opportunity. Now, it's funny. I lived with my brother because he was in med school in the Army.
Yep.
But I actually, slept on the couch in his condo or whatever. It was a condo he had at the time. And ate out of vending machines, did the whole thing of volunteering. Wonderful experience, but I think that really, it made me think bigger. And it made me think, okay, I'm in Washington, D.C., or I'm with student government, and we're testifying at the State House for like an issue with raising of student fees, et cetera. And you're like, wow, when we work towards bigger goals and when we learn a little bit about our neighbors and how to help our community, you can make a difference. And that kind of sparked my interest, I would say.
Gotcha.
And right out of college, I worked for my local state rep, Representative Jeff Hall, and I made $22,000 a year.
Who's a Westford guy, too?
Westford guy is my neighbor, if you can believe it.
Yeah. Tough to live off $22,000 a year.
It was a tough time.
And you're not that old, right?
And Senator, well, we weren't going to get into my age. And Senator, I was going to say, congratulations on passing the bar.
Thank you very much.
I'm a Suffolk alumni, too, but I went to the public policy master's degree in public policy and public administration at the time, and I was going to grad school at night and making like nothing, and living in an apartment with 3 of my friends in Westford, which was a real happening place in your early 20s.
Westford has changed a lot.
It really has.
Right?
I mean, not even that, but it's like, I mean, come on, we're you're in the suburbs. You grew up in that town. It became more and more affluent. Certainly, if my wife and I were first-time home buyers and we wanted to come to Westford, it'd be difficult. And I'm the state representative from that district.
Right.
And that brings us to this sort of crisis we have now with housing across the state.
And what do you attribute just the changing economic conditions and more high-paying jobs and kind of the 495 belt?
Yeah, it's a good, and you've done such a great job, and the leadership here and Representative Mike Kuchmarek, certainly in focusing on economic development. I look at Fitchburg, it's just got great bones. There is so much, you can use, certainly that partnerships that you guys have had with Fitchburg State, and using that as sort of as a research engine. That's the one benefit. I did a lot of work in higher ed when I was a vice chair for a number of years, and I'm passionate about public higher education. But that's the one thing about having a state university in a city or a rural or sort of a clustered area anyway.
Sure.
That's the engine for really everything. And I'm seeing, as I'm driving down Main Street, I remember talking to Mayor Di Natalia one time about using
former colleague in the
my
House of
former colleague, and I sat next to him for about 8 years, right?
All the skeletons. All the skeletons.
Yeah, I know. And I was walking downtown, and the theater, you guys, I know that was a big
Working
sort
on that.
of piece of the economic development, revitalization of this area. Great bones in Fitchburg.
And I think making the downtown a destination is something. We talked with former Senator Ian Goby last month, and population decline in Western Massachusetts over the past 12 years, or since the last census, about 100,000 people. And you've got to create places that people want to be, right? Otherwise, they're not going to live there. They're not going to want to work there, and you won't grow and have a healthy, vibrant community. So,
so
Westford is a model, though.
It is, and it's interesting because I got elected in 2008, subprime mortgage crisis, one of the worst economic recessions we had in 75 years at the time. In Westford, Littleton, and Chelmsford, which is sort of my district. Well, I only say sort of my district because I have 2 precincts in Chelmsford, is the 110 corridor started to become kind of the mini 128. There was an economic revitalization, or sort of a change from the 128 as that branched out with the high-tech sort of growth we had during that period of time. So in Westford and in Littleton, we were IBM's largest software lab in North America came after HP had left in 2008. 2,700 employees. We were cutting ribbons. We had NetScout. We
Left
had
and right.
Red Hat. Puma's headquarters was there. So we had a lot of high-tech growth. With that, certainly brought a lot of employees, people on a higher income level. And then Westford has always been, top 10 in schools over the last decade. So.
But the Westford you grew up with, and is kind of like I think of Lunenburg, where I grew up.
Yeah, of course.
Traditionally, historically, a rural community, right?
Yeah, Westford traditionally was a farm town.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And always was known for strong, commitment to education, but also, had kind of a something for everybody. It had a rural feel. It had great schools. It had great, youth sports, et cetera, and a lot of civic engagement. So things have changed, sure, over the years, and you see the higher income businesses that came to our region, and that started to change when the pandemic happened. Westford, we're starting to see now, and kind of brings me to the housing crisis, and just to add to this is, to all the folks watching this tonight, I know I look like a zombie today. Yesterday, we had an 11-hour hearing for the housing bond bill,
which has got to be a record this session, right?
It certainly was a session.
Yeah,
it certainly was a session. It certainly was a session, and it was 11 hours of public testimony. 257 people or 256 people signed up to testify, and as a chair yourself, you know how difficult that can be. Getting through to everybody, make sure everybody's heard.
When you want 250 people are going to speak, you can't let them speak for 10 minutes or 20 minutes too, right? I mean,
Well, Senator, as we would know, we're not going to say that so many of us are full of hot air.
Yeah.
But certainly, as I chaired this hearing, and it was on the $4 billion housing bond bill, which Governor Healy talked about.
And the governor showed up to your committee hearing yesterday to testify.
The governor was there with the lieutenant governor and the Secretary of Housing at Augustus. and testified on this bill, and it's a $4 billion investment in this housing bond bill. So essentially, it's a 5-year bond bill, which would be the largest investment in housing production in the history of the Commonwealth. Our last bond bill, which is exhausted now, which is a 5-year bond bill as well, this is just coming up on exhaustion now, was about $1.8 billion. So it shows you not only the enormity of the issue, but also it shows you, the investment that has to be made just to catch up where we really should be.
Right.
You've heard this about our housing stock. You hear about affordability. You've heard a number of issues that have been out there: real estate transfer tax, auxiliary dwelling units, rent control, housing production, et cetera. A lot of these issues really come to production, and that is if we're building more.
We need supply side solutions.
That's it. If we're building more for the very low income, all the way to market, and continue to do that and reach this goal that the administration has, which a lot of housing advocates and myself want to reach 200,000 more units in the next 5 years.
Yeah. One of the fascinating, first, I'm very grateful for your time today.
Of course.
I know a lot of members, and especially in the House, are angling to get time with you and to get you to visit their districts.
Sure.
Because the housing crisis or the housing challenges that we face in Fitchburg are different than the ones we face in Leominster, are different than Ashby, are different than Greater Boston, are different than you name
Very
it,
true.
right?
Very true.
Everybody has a distinct set of challenges, whether they be financing or zoning. Can you talk about, like, in your position, you travel all across the state and hear about different challenges everywhere. What's that like? What are the common threads? And then what are the places where you need to get surgical to address what a different region needs?
Absolutely. It's a great question. The way I always approached things, and this was my first chairmanship, in the House, there's 160 members. And sometimes they say it's like herding cats. I think Representative Kuchmarek would say that.
I'd never say a thing like that.
Sometimes a little different.
Nobody in the Senate would ever denigrate the never.
It's difficult, it's difficult sometimes to navigate things. In the Senate you have 40 members, 40 chairmanships.
Were you used to work?
I did for a number of years with Steve. I was the Senate Ways and Means legislative director, so I was kind of a nuts and bolts.
At the center of the universe.
Yeah, nuts and bolts, fiscal person at the time, and before that, a legislative aide and get my, cut my teeth in that as well. But, I just felt the best way to really get my arms around this. Now, I never chaired housing. I grew up in Westford, as you would know, getting to know the community more, and like Lunenburg, the housing issues or the challenges weren't necessarily the same as they are in Leominster and Fitchburg, as they are in Cambridge, as they are in Boston and urban areas.
Yep.
And so in my area at the time, especially in the early 90s, I think a lot of people watching this at home would remember about the 40B challenges. And that's the situation, a part of the law that was built in statute 1969 that essentially was kind of anti-snob zoning. So you had to have a threshold of 10% of your population to be affordable for your housing stock. And to reach that 10%, was a challenge for a lot of communities.
And we have a lot of communities that still aren't there.
They're still not there.
Yep.
And you talk about probably the biggest issue in housing in my time as an aide, an early part of being elected was Chapter 40B, because the key issue at the time was that rural communities felt like they were losing control because developers, if they couldn't get an agreement with the town and the town wasn't at the 10%, could circumvent local control and put, in their sort of in their eyes or something, an undesirable housing project. But certainly we've seen a lot of changes. The administrations and the Baker administration, as well as the Deval-Patrick administration, put sort of benchmarks in place that if you're achieving that 10%, that you won't be penalized by the state. This year, now I say this because I remember being in Gardner Auditorium with like 500 people about anti-40B. They put a ballot initiative in 2010. This year I chaired it. There were four people that showed up.
It's just not that popular to say we don't need more housing, right?
I don't understand, but there was a change, and I think that shift was you gave communities more ability to do things. But that was the kind of issues that we were hearing in a lot of the suburban areas. We weren't necessarily hearing about being sort of locked out of a community or not having the ability to even put down a down payment and be able to start a life with your family. It wasn't as unattainable even 10 years ago, but now it really feels that way.
Yeah.
And now it's all hands on deck. And I think the Senate, the House, the governor. The one thing I really appreciated about Governor Healy's remarks the other night at the State of the State was not only pointing towards our shared values, but also really acknowledging that we all have to work together.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, Senator, we know it. We see it all the time.
Down on the things we agree on, right?
Exactly.
Can we do that? Yeah.
And then we see so many people that grandstand are not doing all the work all the time. So It was great to hear the governor kind of talk about our shared responsibility, our shared values, our shared work, and housing is probably top of the list.
Another thing that the governor mentioned is the tax relief package that we passed, $1 billion back to taxpayers, focused on the middle and working class. But there's also a down payment in there in terms of housing production. Yep. So we tripled the Housing Development Incentive Program from $10 to $30 million a year, and we also expanded the low-income housing tax credit.
Yeah.
Could you talk about, and much of that is due to your leadership in the House. Could you talk about those programs and how they are examples of ways we are trying to get innovative about producing more housing?
Well, it's interesting, right? And if I could focus a little bit on HDIP, because it was something I know you worked very hard on.
Certainly.
And I know that you led the charge in the Senate.
In the Gateway Cities, right?
In the Gateway Cities caucus as well.
Trying to get a coalition around the state.
It's interesting. You see politics get involved, obviously, within us, right? It's pretty political. But you see this sort of resistance, right, from some ideological groups to have any sort of a tax cut. A resistance towards businesses getting any sort of incentive or businesses having that additional push to work with the publics to get things done. I thought with the HDIP program, there's a lot of resistance. I know that.
Certainly. We had a very public debate and fight about it.
When I think, and I attribute it to the very first place I visited when I became housing chair was Hyannis.
Yeah.
And I think this leads to the HDIP discussion because every part of the Commonwealth has a little bit of different challenges. You look at the Cape, post-pandemic, right? People were working out of their house. People were working remote. People turned their family room into an office. I know my wife did. Right, my wife works from home, still does since the pandemic.
We don't have a kitchen table anymore. Kitchen table's a workstation.
Everything's a workstation, right? Especially ourselves, we're not made of money, but so we're changing the way we do work, the way we work. People are starting to downsize their $900,000 house in the suburbs.
Yep.
And they're going to go to the office at work maybe once a month, work from home at their beach house that they tricked out in the Cape.
Yeah.
And because of that sort of rethinking of your life and the way people wanted to live and the way people wanted to work post-pandemic, that only exacerbated the housing crisis as well.
And there's repercussions we're still trying to figure out and deal with.
We
right?
certainly are.
Yeah.
I mean, there are best practices when it comes to the pandemic, right? Remote meetings to add more access to people across the state when we do public hearings or municipalities, et cetera. There are best practices that we learned to be a little bit better and smarter during the pandemic. But when it comes to housing, I started off in Hyannis. And the real issue there was like auxiliary dwelling units, like trying to have in-law apartments, trying to figure out a way that people that actually grew up in the Cape could still afford to live there and not the people that decided to leave some of the higher rent areas and then move to the Cape House.
Right now in many places across the state, you can't build an ADU by right.
That's
correct?
Right.
Okay.
So ADUs go through sort of a rigorous local permitting process, et cetera. You can do it through, housing choice, which was passed before by changing the threshold of voting. You do have a better chance of pushing these things through, but there's still things that can get held up in. And I think it's still not a one size fits all for every community.
Sure.
Some communities are still concerned about it, but HDIP, my second place was Pittsfield. Now, Pittsfield's a lot of similarities to Fitchburg.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing a lot of the gateway cities, Haverhill, Worcester, Fitchburg,
I drove through
New Bedford.
Holyoke this weekend, right?
Holyoke.
An old paper town, just like Fitchburg. Yeah, I mean, so many.
Now, I spent a lot of time in Holyoke as well.
Yeah.
And I go talking to about accessory dwelling units. You go to Cambridge, we're talking about rent control. We're talking about real estate transfer tax, more revenues in the city. They're talking about more revenues. You go to Pittsfield, you go to New Bedford, you go to Fitchburg. It's HDIP, and it's ways to build more market. And essentially, the way to attract young people to these affordable cities, and they're not super affordable, right? A little bit more affordable than the surrounding areas, is to build a vibrant downtown where you attract young people, where you can walk and do all your, shopping and get your amenities done. And that's what a lot of young people want to do.
Yeah, if you work around South Station, you can go take the commuter rail once a week, which is a lot more palatable than getting on a 90-minute train ride 5 days a week.
But that's an exciting thing for you, Senator.
I think so. Yeah.
And think of where you are. And Fitchburg has so much to offer, and you have great bones. You have a great university. You have a lot of great leaders that work here. It's an exciting part. So I look at New Bedford, a Haverhill, a Lowell, a lot of the same challenges. Old mill towns that are switching over.
Yeah.
And with the economy taking, a hit and inflation rising, it's been difficult to get things back on track.
And you mentioned your work as a staffer, not to divert too much from housing, but you worked for State Senator Steve Pangiotakis, who's a great guy. I know was a great mentor to you.
Sure.
But also chaired the Ways and Means Committee, which in the Senate, means he was making some major policy decisions about where state resources are directed. But he also represents Lowell.
Yeah.
So, economic revitalization and development is something that you've worked on for years and years. What are some of the things that you did in Lowell and you leveraged in Lowell, working with Senator Pangiotakis, that the rest of the state could learn from or benefit from?
I think Steve, first to say is he's a great friend, a great mentor, as to you as well.
Yep.
He thinks the world of you. I know you guys. He was the former chair of Ways and Means, and I was his legislative director.
Right-hand man.
So I did all the budgeting and stuff like that, along with the budget director, of course. But just for the edification of people, the Ways and Means Committee deals with all the money in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and so every year we have to have a balanced budget. Over 50.
Stinks. Yeah, right? Stinks.
Well, that's the one thing. The difference, I always say to my constituents, the difference of us and the federal government is we don't print money.
Right.
Okay. So we have to have a balanced budget every year, and
which I don't think a lot of people appreciate either.
I don't think they do either.
Yeah.
It always seems to be a talking point.
Yeah.
On the federal government, they don't have a balanced budget, right? But nonetheless, it's been, it's something that every year those are those challenges. We just came through some cuts, right, and some expanded. 9C cuts that the governor put forward because of lack of revenues. It's an interesting time, economically. We're seeing, costs rise with inflation and material costs, et cetera, making things difficult to build without those incentives, without that help, without those partnerships. And on top of that, it's frustrating because you see there's, certainly inflation, but the economy's still, unemployment's still, pretty low, and things are still pretty strong. So it's somewhat perplexing, confusing. But the last two revenue cycles, we've seen a downturn in our returns, and that had an impact on our budget just a few weeks ago that not many legislators were typically excited about.
Yeah, right. Well, you came in 2008 when times were tough. I came in when there were revenues, more than $100 billion of federal revenue working their ways into the state coffers. We had some good years. So.
It is true, Senator. Yeah. I was thinking that before. I was thinking the whole idea that, people are freaking out about these 9C cuts, and they're like, okay, well, it's a 50% reduction across the board on all these earmarks. Except for Westford, of course, Senator, we still had the full $100,000 for the park. So I don't know how. I don't know how
when your partners share Arciero.
Well, no. So it's one of those things that I've seen. That's probably about my, sixth time a governor has been the 9C cuts. And the one thing about this is, I was like to some of my colleagues, I'm like, guys, this isn't too bad. They're giving you 50% of it. They usually cut everything. It was zeroed out.
Right.
It was zeroed out on most parts. So, but I learned so much from Steve. I think like you grew up in Lunenburg. I grew up in Westford.
Kind of like on
Lowell
the outside looking in, right?
Totally.
Yeah, definitely.
And so I'm definitely, I was definitely a suburban kid. But a lot of roots in Lowell, just like you have a lot of roots in Fitchburg.
Sure.
And for myself, my father had a small business in Lowell. My parents were from New York City originally, moved in Massachusetts in the 60s. I grew up in town. I have an older brother, older sister, and I'm the only one in Westford. My parents have passed, and my brother's in Atlanta, my sister's in the South as well, in North Carolina. But yeah, I think it's very similar in the sense that we all have family history. My father worked in Lowell. My mom I did for a period of time. There's a lot of connections there. So it was a natural progression to be able to sort of work in a city like that for, in government and a state senator, state rep, because I think just like you, it's so natural for you to be in Fitchburg. I mean, your family,
sure.
Your family's been involved in public service, elected office.
Yeah, I love telling the story. I think my dad lost 2 elections, which was my first taste of politics. But he lost.
Now, how old were you?
10, maybe 11.
10. Okay.
He lost the first one by 7 votes, and the second one by maybe 12.
Now, this was select board, right?
Select board.
And so was
in
this?
Lunenburg.
Oh, in Lunenburg.
In
so
Lunenburg,
you're talking like 500 people voting, right?
It's bigger turnout than that.
Okay,
right?
all right,
We lost
all right.
but that was a good young lesson growing up, and it helps you like knock those doors when you're tired and you don't, because you know what losing feels like.
Well, you know what's really funny? I'd say this. My dad, I miss him every day. Bless his soul. But my dad's an old school Italian.
Yeah.
And he could, he was always very proud of me that I was involved in government and politics.
Yeah.
But he's always like, why are you working so hard and not making any money? And that was always what my dad said to me all the time. And it was like, I don't know, Dad.
I like it. I'm happy.
And that's the thing. I mean, I think, he's from definitely that school. My mom was a nurse, so there was always that concern for us, right? I mean, our family, they understand in public service how difficult things can be, and how hard the last 4 years were.
Yeah, sure.
And certainly the decorum of politics
has basically dissipated.
Has eroded.
Right?
Yeah. And so it's tough, I mean, I would say even in this job, we wouldn't do it unless we loved it. And I think when you can actually see transformative things that you were involved with for positive for your community,
it makes it worth it.
It makes it worth it. But even the small things, right? I mean, even the small things where you something very small like letting somebody testify at a hearing that's from your district, or writing a letter of recommendation, or going to an Eagle Scout Court of Honor.
Yeah.
All those things, man. At the end of the day, you don't know how important it is to someone's life that you took a few minutes to help.
So you're on the precipice of passing some major legislation, right, that addresses this housing crisis.
We just had the hearing, like I said. We just had the hearing. So now, between ourselves and the senator, we're going to sort of reconcile some things, and at some point, we're going to move forward out of committee with a bill, and I assume it will make us a pit stop in bonding. But
yeah. Absolutely.
Like I said, Senator, I think I'm still a little shell-shocked from that hearing yesterday. So for everybody at home, I know I look like exhausted, but
no, I appreciate it. Thanks for being such a great mentor and role model to me, especially introducing me to the new part of my district.
Yeah.
But, Representative and Chair Arciero, Chair of the Housing Committee, and somebody that we're proud to claim in North Central, and certainly in the Neshoba Valley. But we're gonna pull you into the North Central.
I love it.
Moniker when you're on FATV at least.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
But thanks for all you do, and thanks for joining us.
Thank
today.
you, Senator.
You bet. We'll see you next month, everybody.